This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for individual professional legal advice. The podcast information was carefully compiled from vetted sources and references. However, Rose Resources Outreach to Safeguard the Elderly cannot guarantee that you will not fall victim to a scam. Let's talk about scams. It's the must-listen show for anyone who wants to protect themselves and their loved ones from scams. Every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Time on K4HD Radio, Joyce Petrowski, founder of Rose, and her guests will provide valuable insights and practical tips on how to recognize and protect yourself from scams. And now, here is your host, Joyce Petrowski.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Joyce Petrowski, founder of Rose Resources Outreach to Safeguard the Elderly. You can find more information on our website at roseadvocacy.org. You can find our social media links. You can also scroll down to the bottom of the homepage and sign up for our emailed newsletter and or our mailed newsletter. And so today we are going to talk about data breaches and how those help scammers and what you should watch for and what you can do after you've been notified of one. And I have a guest with me today, Dr. Martina Dove. She's been on before. So Dr. Martina Dove is a research and behavioral science lead at Charm Security and the author of The Psychology of Fraud, Persuasion, and Scam Techniques. With a background in psychology, her expertise lies at the intersection of deception, social engineering, and the psychological mechanisms of persuasion. Her work explores the cognitive and behavioral factors underlying fraud compliance and victimization. So let's welcome Martina.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Martina. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. And thanks for having me yet again. I love coming and talking about scams.
Great. I am going to check really quickly on my audio because here I gotta hang on one second. That might be better. I was having a hard time here.
Okay.
That is much better.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Now I can hear you in my earphones now. All right. So data breaches. I saw that you had just recently made a post on LinkedIn about hearing about a data breach that was Apple, Facebook, Google, I think. There was a lot of major companies involved. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, data breaches happen all the time.
Right.
I think this is just now like a fact of life. I don't know that there's a company out there that hasn't been breached at some point.
True. Right.
And they are very, very important because they do allow scammers to not only with the stolen details, which get harvested and used, but they give scammers a novelty factor to kind of approach you with, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. But this latest one, it sounded like it hit a bunch of really major players that a lot of people would have accounts with. I mean, kind of like Amazon has millions of people, Facebook has millions of people, Google does, Apple does, right? So I think it was kind of a jackpot breach for the hackers, and then it's going to automatically be a jackpot for the scammers, right?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. Like you said, there are tons and tons of people that have Apple iPhones that have Apple accounts, that have Facebook accounts, and we all use different things. Like I use my Google, account for email. I use Facebook to, that Google email to get into Facebook. I use, so it's all connected. And I must say, I spent a good couple of hours changing password across like most of the things that I have, just in case, because if somebody gets access to your email, they can then maybe get access to your Facebook and so on and so forth, and use the pieces of those information to actually persuade you to give them more.
Right. So that's an interesting point that you made. There is a lot of accounts when you go to sign in. It'll ask you if you want to sign in through Google or do you want to sign in through Facebook, not necessarily having to put your your username and password in right there. So if you're using Facebook or Google to sign in to a lot of other accounts, now you not only have to change your Facebook and your Google and your Apple password and all that, you've got to go to all those other accounts that you've used, Google or Facebook, to sign in with and change all of that information.
Yeah, it's advisable to do that. It doesn't necessarily mean that a scammer is going to attack you from all sides, because at the end of the day, they'll do whatever's easier for them, and
True.
what's easy, quick and easy.
Yeah.
But I think it's always advisable. I always think if you have an email that you're banking with too, always change, after any data breach that you heard about, always change your password for that email. It's, better to be safe than sorry, just in case.
Well, right,
Definitely.
because even if you use your email for the username, right, and you might have a different password for your bank accounts or any financial accounts, but if someone was able to get into your email, then they could be one step closer to trying to get into your financial accounts.
Yeah, imagine if somebody gets access to your email. You still may have access to the emails, but this person is logging in as you, and maybe they can manipulate a lot of the times. Like if somebody's really motivated, they'll will adjust your settings so you're not even getting alerted, and so they'll change the email that usually alerts you or something like that, and then they can change the password for your bank, and so it's all connected. And I think we need to think about every time we want convenience, that costs us. And I think that's one way that we pay for that convenience. Yeah.
And there's a lot of things out there that are convenient, right? But you have to think of all of the risk, and it might not be just the risk associated with that particular program or app. It could be because things are so connected. And if you're using your email, right, to log in, or you're using the same password, it's all connected. Because if one's breached, they're not just going to use it on just one account. They're going to put it in their software and find all these other accounts that you've reused logins on, because they know. And it's interesting. I read these articles that these tech companies put out every year about password statistics. And the one that I just read said, and it was at least half, maybe, if not more, people are still using the word password for their password, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And sometimes they just choose that. Other times that might be the default password that a company has. And when they sign up for it, they're not automatically then directed to change their password. I don't know. I think that's something that companies really need to do, right? If you're going to have a default password like that, then it should be, when someone logs in for the first time, they should automatically be redirected to change their password.
Yeah, and I think the organizations are getting better at that, and they are asking you to choose a strong password. So I think we have gotten a lot better at but I think what I would like to see as well, a lot of the times it gets really tricky with passwords as well, where every single company has their own, format of how they want the password. And sometimes it's really, really difficult to account for all of the formats and remember them. So this is
Right.
why I think people default to the simplest thing they can remember, which then obviously make them vulnerable. And I'll tell you a funny story, and I'm not going to mention which relative, but one of my relatives has passwords that, like, it's literally almost like the name, surname, and date of birth. And like, I'm constantly telling them, don't do that,
Right.
for obvious reasons. But yeah, it's like I'm having to sort of tell people, like, don't, and then people just, unless you have been breached, unless your details were stolen, you have this sense of like, oh, it won't happen to me. Like, why would somebody, I hear that a lot, who would want my stuff? Like, who would want to get into my Facebook? Well, it's not about you. But for example, like I posted something on LinkedIn when this breach happened, and I posted on my Facebook saying to people like, hey, expect your friends texting you and saying they need money.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened immediately. One of my friends said, I just got a WhatsApp message from a friend asking to lend her, like $1,400. And, she luckily said, can you call me back? And then obviously was suspicious and saw my message. But a lot of the times when people breach your Facebook, it doesn't harm you in so many ways, but it harms your friends, because then the scammer will be posting on your behalf to your friends asking for money. So I think that's something that I think people need to understand. Even if your Facebook you don't have anything to steal on a Facebook, think about how you getting a message from, let's say, your cousin on Facebook that they're in trouble, they've been kidnapped, they've been harmed, and they need money, would feel. And I think that's kind of like, I think people don't really think further than just like, well, I don't have anything. I hear that so many times, I don't have anything to steal, like, I don't care,
Right.
But I think, yeah, it's like what you said, we all connect, it's all connected,
It's
right?
all connected.
Think about it as
right, because it's convenient to have everything connected, right? And we like convenience. It makes it more simpler to do what we want to do online and not have to worry about navigating through a password manager, right? If that's not working appropriately, or however you store your passwords. But so it's interesting. There's a gentleman here in town that I work with. He sponsors our program to take our program out to some different communities. And I was just doing a presentation with him yesterday, and he told, it was for his clients, and he told his clients about how he got a call from one of his friends who lives in another state. It's a state where this gentleman grew up in, and his friends saw that his sister was advertising this vehicle for sale. The price made it seem like it was a fire sale type thing. Like, I have to get rid of it. It's a low price because I need the money, whatever. And he was really interested in it. And he just, for whatever reason, said, I'm going to call my friend and ask him about this. And so he did. And he's like, hey, your sister's selling this vehicle, online and on Facebook. And he was like, no, she's been hacked. Her Facebook's been hacked. It's not her. But he said he got that call from a couple different friends. They were ready to send the money, right? And it would have been thousands of dollars, but something made them call him to say, hey, your sister's selling this. It's a really cheap price. What's going on? Right. And so it doesn't necessarily affect his sister, but guess what? Her friends are going to get affected because they can lose through no fault of hers, right? No fault of hers, but it can affect your friends. That
it
they
can definitely
easily
affect your
expand.
friends. Yeah. And I think like one thing that I always advocate in terms of the data breaches, right? Like it's not just the data that gets stolen. Like I, always say this, scammers really love any novel situation. If there's some kind of a natural disaster, they will hit people with charity scams. If there's like during COVID, we had tons of websites selling imaginary masks and things like that, and
hand sanitizer and all
hand
that
sanitizer, like miracle cures, like people were buying vitamins or something like that. And one of the things that like happens during, like, after a breach, it gives scammers that ability to call you and pretend it's a bank, warning you about the breach, and to transfer the money to some other account for safekeeping or something like that. So it gives them a narrative they can manipulate. And then you get tons of phishing emails too. Like, for example, yesterday I got a text from my CEO of my company saying, "Can you talk?" And I'm like, I know it's not you, but like it happened so quickly after the breach was announced, so you get lots of phishing emails, lots of like SMS from your bank, or let's say Apple will text you and say, "Hey, we've been breached. Can you please, change your password through this link?" You know what I mean? So it's kind of like stuff like that. There's recovery schemes. If you're defrauded straight after the data breach, you may then get a recovery scheme offered to you. Hey, like you've lost this money, we can help recover the funds, and then scammers will kind of like get you again. So it gives them more than just your data. Data is just there to enhance credibility when they call you, so that they can say, "Hey, we know your password, we know your email, we are who we are."
Right. Yeah.
But it also gives them this narrative that they can exploit too.
Right. Yeah. And I talked to a lady here that she got that very call a couple years ago, pretending to be from the bank, that there was fraud. It dealt with fraud versus a data breach, but there's fraud on your account, and they convinced her to verify everything, and then said, we need to move the money out of your account into another account for safekeeping until we can get rid of this fraud. And she wanted to go to the bank, and they convinced her that no, because we feel it's one of the employees at the bank that's committing this fraud. And they sound so legitimate, and they say pretty similar to what a bank would say if that really was happening, to make it so believable, like you said, right? And they very well, it might have all started from a data breach where they got her information, but then they used it as there's fraud going on with your account and all that. She ended up losing 75% of her life savings.
Yep.
I mean,
no, definitely. I had a similar case. I spoke to a victim in the UK, and this is another thing that, like, it's nothing to do with the data breaches or anything like that, but it's like to do with like a public information. So, for example, this person has just recently sold the house and had a lot of money in the account, and these are public records. People can find out who sold. So scammers will use things like that to then target the individual. They can purchase your details from somebody else, link the data. There are data brokers that link data, so you have name, they'll link it to this, to the address, to IP address, to your computer, there are legitimate data brokers that do that for purposes of targeting from legitimate companies.
For advertising and marketing.
Exactly. And so like she got called by somebody pretending to be from the the financial authority that is like a very I think it's called the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK. It's an authority like body that governs all of the banks and anything financial.
Right. So kind of like FINRA and stuff like that. That's in Washington,
kind of like
D.C.
That. Yeah. And then talking to her for about a month and a half, every single day, updates like what's happening with her account, that they suspect insider fraud. She was speaking not to one, but to two people. So now another person is supporting what the first one is saying, so you believe it more. And then suddenly there's an incident, right? Like, the person is going to do it tonight. You have to move the money. And basically, they coached her what to say when she goes to the bank.
Absolutely.
But she believed that everybody at the bank could be a suspect because they still didn't find out who it is. So, it's like I think a lot of the times bank may be surprised when they try to intervene and they don't understand why a person just doesn't take the word. Right. But like you have to understand the amount of manipulation that goes in before, that it carefully goes in before, because if somebody called you and just told you one thing on a first phone call, you would go like, who are you?
Right.
If somebody called you and said, hey Joyce, like please transfer this money because like there's insider fraud in the bank, you would go,
Right.
who are you?
Exactly.
Right? But
No,
if
I'm not
somebody
transferring
keeps
money. Right.
exactly, but if somebody keeps calling you for a whole month daily, two different people updating you on what's going on with the investigation, you
Hmm.
start to believe it.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to
Right.
intervene, and then of course banks often will just intervene in a very literal way instead of actually prodding what's happening. And then it ends up just like not being very successful, because by that time the victim is groomed, and it can be
Right.
devastating, like you said.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's like a grooming effect, like they do
Yeah,
with the romance scam and the pig
yeah,
butchering scam, where they take the time to groom before
yeah,
they actually then start wanting you, with
yeah,
transfer your money, however they want it done, right? So
yeah.
you had mentioned like the text message that someone had said they received from a friend asking for money after this data breach. Are there other
Yeah.
things that you see, specific scams or, like phishing emails or anything like that that have a tendency to happen right after these breaches?
Yeah, I think like you need to look for any kind of phishing text or emails, and I think the most frequent one will be email or a text will pretend to be from the body that was breached, from
Got
the
it.
entity that was breached. So, like,
Okay.
let's say if it's T-Mobile or Apple, you will get like emails that will talk about the breach, saying,
Uh-huh.
"Oh, in a recent data breach, please verify your details." So they will actually use the data breach as an excuse to contact you and
Okay.
try to sort of like tell you, hey, it's a legitimate company just contacting their customers to let them know, like any company would. So a lot of the times as well, people don't understand that when a data breach happens, sometimes the company it's not yet aware that it happened, so they
Right. It might
can't
take
warn
some
the
time.
Exactly. It may take some time to be discovered that somebody has entered your infrastructure or something like that if you're a big company. So, like any kind of things like that. But you know, I'm absolutely positive that your details are immediately sold on too. So you
Oh,
may be
absolutely.
hit by various other things
Right.
too. So it could be unrelated phishing emails, offers to buy things, or anything else like medical. It can be something unrelated too, but there'll be an uptick in
Yeah. Yeah. You
in
see an
a kind of
uptick
like the
in it.
amount.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
So at the presentation yesterday that I had mentioned, a lady had asked a question, and we were talking about how your information gets out there, and data breaches was the first one we talked about, and
yeah,
it's like you can't control when a company gets breached, but you can control the information you give to a company, right? And you just want to make sure the information you're giving is absolutely necessary to do
yes,
whatever it is you're doing with that company, and don't be afraid to ask questions. But she had asked the question, is government doing anything to help stop this, or to put things in play to make the penalties harsher, to make it more of a deterrent? Have you heard of anything that maybe they're working on, maybe some recent bill or law that's been passed that um
yeah, I know. I don't know of any specific like recent bills, but I know that scams are a big, big problem for banks,
mhm,
and they are desperately trying to figure out a way how to intervene.
okay,
And there are many companies that like I've just joined a company that is actually looking to account for that human element, and how do we prevent, how do we
got it.
intervene in a good way. So
Mhm,
I'm happy to say that I'm seeing more awareness around scams and how humans
good.
get exploited. So that's one thing. A second thing as well, like there are differences in companies, right? So
Mhm,
anything governmental, anything to do with like heavily spaces and entities that have to adhere to compliance,
okay,
such as HIPAA for
right,
medical, or some other compliance for like banking industry. A lot of the times they keep those details what's called on-prem. That it's very difficult to infiltrate that if you're a malicious actor.
Okay.
Right? Because the network doesn't allow, like there's no communication between the outside network, or, like things are not in a cloud and able to,
Easier
be
to penetrate.
So the servers are like on the premise somewhere, and they're not communicating with anything outside, or at least they limit the amount of things that can communicate with things
Got
outside.
it. Okay.
So that doesn't exclude the inside fraud, right? Somebody on the inside could also, be a malicious actor as well. So when you see these breaches, that usually happen with things that perhaps don't have the most sensitive of details. But if you do have your, let's say, Apple account, I have my credit card connected to it because I'm purchasing things with it, like, so you do have this sensitive information, even with like these other things that get breached. So it's really important to, like you said, maybe don't give them, a lot of these companies, they ask for date of birth. I always try to shield mine, unless you're my bank or you're my doctor. I don't think you need to know exactly, like, you don't have to wish me a happy birthday. Like, I'm okay, I'll be fine, But those are the things, like I always say to people, just lie, invent a birthday that it's not your birthday, but it's like maybe, same year, but not the same month or a day. Or you can, like, invent a birthday that you, like, when you have to put it on a form, you have to put it on a form.
Then you want to be truthful. Right.
Yeah, and I think one big thing that I've come across, and it always really puzzles me, right? When you work as a contractor, let's say you accept a contract at a company, you're a consultant or something like that. You will be dealing with a recruiter that it's like part of a company, let's say, and that company will always say, "Hey, can you give me your partial date of birth and your last 4 digits of the SSN for our internal tool?" And this tool is just a management tool, so that they're like, if they have two people with the same name, like, they can differentiate them.
Yeah.
But then I'm thinking, why can't I just invent a PIN, right? That it's not my SSN number, like 4 digits by which you can call my bank and authenticate me,
Right, absolutely.
So I invent things for that too. Like, I'll have a digit that I give them that it's not my SSN. So, like, I think a lot of these companies don't really think from the security standpoint at all.
Well, right, because they probably have a lot of different departments, right? And you have one department that's going to do this, and they feel they need this. And okay, well, the last 4 of your social security number is going to be a way that I can track your account in case somebody has the same name, right? And it's actually interesting. You mentioned that. I was at one of my doctors recently, and they actually had 2 different patients, same name, Joyce Petrowski, same birth date, everything, day, month, year, but the middle initial was different. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, is this accurate, or is this maybe somebody trying to impersonate me, right? And it was interesting because they were telling me about the results of some lab work, and I'm like, that test does not even sound familiar. When was that lab work done? And he told me the date, and I'm like, you have someone else's information in my account because I wasn't even in the country on that date to go have labs done, right? And so that's how I found out about it.
Wow. So somebody used your medical insurance?
I don't know. I don't know. That was, on them to figure out. I think what happened was someone in the office saw the name and the birth date and ended up putting it in my account instead of the other person's account, not realizing they were that close, right? That's what I think. But how easy would it be for someone, to do that? It could, but so you're right. I totally agree. Like the IRS, they very well could use the last 4 digits of your social security number because they have everybody's, right, from filing taxes.
Yeah.
But they came up with this identity theft PIN, identity protection PIN. Right? The 6 digits, they give you a new one every year. And so they've gotten on board with that. And
Exactly. I mean, like you can just as easily in a job tool, like
uh-huh.
I can invent a pin. So it'll be almost the same, like the same as my SSN number,
Yeah,
right? Like in that it's unique to me, and it's very
exactly.
unlikely somebody's gonna have somebody with the same name, date of birth, or whatever, like is gonna
Right,
have exactly the same thing.
right.
But like one thing that really, like it's funny you mentioned your like this mishap
Oh,
with the
right.
like lab
Yeah.
results. One of the things that I'm always really cautious about and always upsets me a little bit when you're queuing, let's say, at a hospital or a
Hmm.
doctor's office or something, there's people behind you. I can hear what the person is telling the receptionist.
Oh, right.
They'll always say to you, "Hey, tell me your, Kaiser number or whatever,
Right.
and date of birth." And I'm like, I'm telling you all, like I'm telling you, and then I'm having to like confirm my name, and somebody behind me hears
Can
that.
hear it all.
I I know, and like I was kind of thinking, if you want to just hang out, you can just like really take down these details and then
Exactly.
sell it, and it's So I always take out my card and give it to them,
Hmm.
and I'll say I would prefer if you just take the information from here, and if you want to confirm something that's not on a card, then like I'll confirm my, like I don't know,
Just
like
show it to me.
physical address.
Show it to me, and I'll
Exactly.
say yes or
Yeah.
no. Yeah.
But I shouldn't be shouting my date of birth and my like the number like for everybody. Like those, people don't realize how much scammers, even if they just hang around and they see that and take that
Yep.
down, somebody can misuse it. It may not even be an organized criminal, but like, I could be hit by, okay, she was like in the radiology, I could be hit by a scam that
Hmm.
afternoon. That'll
Right.
look realistic because they'll quote that
Because you were
number.
there, right?
Yeah, I
It,
was
it's
there.
not
Yeah,
just
exactly.
it's
Yeah,
not just perfect timing on their part. They knew you were there, and so then they can target
yeah,
you with a specific scam. Yeah, I mean it's just crazy. I think you almost have to try to think like a
yeah.
scammer, right? And I just think that, you know what, I wouldn't put anything past them, right? So
No,
for them
yeah.
to be hanging out for an hour or so and not being, seen that they're hanging out in an office to hear, I wouldn't put it past them. I just
I
wouldn't.
mean, like it's probably not realistic, but
No,
like because it's so easy to steal that information, but
it's
at the
probably
same
already out.
time, I'm kind of, yeah, it's already out there. But then I'm thinking, if I was a smart scammer, right, and I wanted to make sure that I'm very realistic, I would do that. Knowing what I know about scammers and stuff, because
Yeah,
the more you know of contextual information about somebody, the more realistic the call will sound, and the quicker you're going to get to what you need with that
right.
victim.
The quicker you're
Yeah.
going to make it more believable that they're going to
Yes.
think you're authentic and you are who you say you are.
Yes.
Absolutely. Right. It's now you
Yeah.
mentioned something earlier that you were starting to see a lot more people seem to be more aware of the scams. I think that's fantastic because I think the first step in protecting yourself is one, realizing that you are a target and you very well could. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how
Yeah.
savvy you are. I don't care how less amount of money, more amount of money you have. Everyone's a target and everyone needs to realize that they are and that they could become a victim. And then it gets into you need to be aware and educated, right? And so I'm so happy to
Yes.
hear that you're seeing that people are more
Yeah.
aware.
I'm seeing, like, I think what's exciting that's happening is that the organizations such as banks are
Mhm.
realizing that, scams are becoming a huge problem, right?
Absolutely.
And so, like, there's like, whereas even just a decade ago or less than a decade ago, personal fraud was just kind of like dismissed by the fraud professionals. It was like, well, that's you're responsible for, sending this
Right.
money. Whereas now I think I feel like there's more empathy coming from the fraud professionals, and
Yes.
there's more interest in understanding of the manipulation that goes into it. It's
Mhm.
no longer, I think we're changing the slight shift, in how the society is viewing, you know, scam victimization. And I'm really
Absolutely.
pleased about that. Yeah,
That's
I'm really
that's
pleased
great.
about that.
Yeah, I know one of our other advisory board members did a video on that recently. She had happened to see a post. Somebody made an anonymous post on the Nextdoor app about being a victim, and they kind of went through the things. And not all the people that were commenting, but some of the people were just downright mean and blaming him or
Mm-hmm.
her
Mm-hmm.
for the situation they got into. And it was like,
Yeah.
you better be careful, because you know what? You might be the next one. And then you're going to be like, oh, wow, I shouldn't,
Yeah.
right? You have to
Yeah.
lead with a lot more empathy.
I
So
think not just like, I mean, that's just not very nice as a human being, but
it's
I
not,
also can
no.
explain that. I can explain that in a psychology way, right?
Okay.
Like,
All
so
right.
people do that. Like, we have to think about ourselves in a positive light.
Mhm.
That, that kind of like bolsters our self-esteem. And it like makes us a functioning human being. Because if we didn't have a self-esteem, we would be depressed and we wouldn't feel
Right.
good about ourselves and we would not be,
You
we
wouldn't be
wouldn't be good.
right.
Yeah, exactly. So people tend to have this belief that it wouldn't happen to them because they
Mhm.
want to control, like they want to feel like they have the control. It's an illusion of control. It's a cognitive bias, right? People want to believe that they could control situations that are random, right? So like you see
Okay.
that not just with the fraud victimization, but also with victims of sexual crimes. Like she was out at 10 p.m. She deserved it. She was wearing this. That. Like we try to rationalize it. And the reason why we rationalize it, it's maybe not that we want to be mean to that victim, but it's almost a fear in us and we're controlling for that fear. Like if I'm not out at 10 p.m., if I'm not wearing that, then
Oh,
it wouldn't happen to
exactly.
me.
Yeah.
Do you
Then
see what I
you're
mean?
rationalizing why that couldn't happen to you.
Yes,
Got it.
exactly. So
Okay.
I think a lot of the times people turn on fraud victims because they want to believe it wouldn't happen to them. But I've actually found that people who hold that belief, right? People who have a strong belief that scams only happen to gullible people and stuff like that, are actually more vulnerable because it makes
Right.
them less careful. You know,
Exactly.
I
It
yeah,
Yeah, it
exactly.
lets their guard down, right? And
Yeah.
speaking of that, I've seen some online. I've just come across some different people, whether they're in the education unit, like maybe a college professor in their class is doing um a a program or
Mhm.
project. That's what I want to say. They're doing a project, or something like that, and they come up with like a checklist. Like, how vulnerable are you, or
Mhm.
how much at risk are you to be defrauded or scammed? And it's like, on the surface, I don't like those. And the reason is, I mean,
Mhm.
some of the questions in there might be really good questions, and they might make you think about, well, yeah, I need to fix my email because I am at risk. So it's an, for that. But on the surface, I don't want people, if they take it and get a really low score, so they have a low risk, I don't want them to let their guard down, because
Mhm.
the minute they let their
Mhm.
guard down and think, oh, I have a low risk, it's very rare chance it's going to happen to me. That's when it's going to happen. Right.
Yeah, I think like, I mean, depending on whether you're just doing research for the sake, like,
Right.
like whether you want to see how many people feel it wouldn't happen to them and then you're
Oh,
manipulating
right.
with
Yeah.
something else. And like, if it's a real research or is it some kind of a thing? Because every single fraud victim that I've ever spoken to, every single one, first thing they said to me, I never thought this would happen to me because I'm a smart person.
Yeah.
Right. And I think like we need to learn from that. Right. So
Hmm.
if you are asking a very literal question, do you think you're vulnerable? Everybody's going to say no. And it's only when they scammed that they realize their own vulnerability.
Yeah.
And some don't even realize then. I've spoken to some victims who say, hey, I accept that's part of life. And, I'm not going to change anything about me. I still want to believe the rest in people. So, like, a lot of the time it's individual, but a lot of people only start paying attention to scam advice or fraud advice or education when they are scammed, because I think it's one of those things in our lives we like to feel, because I think it's that social stigma that connects being a victim of a scam with being stupid or gullible or
Yeah.
something like that,
And
right?
that we need to
Which
change
isn't the
that,
case.
right? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
and I'm trying in these presentations, right? I mean, it's like I try to
Yeah.
reinforce scams have nothing to do with intelligence. Because if they
No.
did, yes, they have something to do with money, but if it was really based on intelligence, they would somehow be tricking you into taking an IQ test to see how you scored. And they're only going to go after the ones that score low, right?
Yeah, that's a good
Everybody's a
point.
target, right? Everybody. So,
Well, I will tell you something quite interesting about that
okay.
too, right? There
Okay.
is actually a research out there that
Okay.
hypothesizes that, in the olden days, I'm talking about like a decade ago or more, right? Like there would still be emails that were like, hey, I'm a Nigerian prince. I'm
Oh,
like
yeah.
wanting
Yeah.
to, so there were a lot of like bank officials from Nigeria. There was even like, I think there was an email circulating like a Nigerian astronaut lost in space or something like that, right?
Oh,
So they
okay.
were like, they were incredibly stupid, incredibly just like non-believable emails. But the sad thing is, right, like there's a hypothesis, and it was like a research done by Microsoft, that like sometimes scammers send such obvious scams to identify the most vulnerable victims. So they are going after people who maybe have early onset on dementia or some other cognitive
Okay.
disabilities,
Okay.
or they really don't know, they're not internet savvy, so they've never come across anything like that.
Got
Or,
it.
they're catching, so they're specifically identifying people who will then be hit with other scams. You know what I mean?
That are really more vulnerable for reasons beyond their control.
So I think that's the equivalent of an IQ test you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
That is like, there is definitely, and that's something that I always try to talk about when I go to talk to elderly people or people that are, in the later stages of their life. I don't like the word elderly, because you can be in the later stages of your life and still be quite young in the mind and the heart, and like
Exactly.
but one of the things that, like, why they're so viciously targeted is because they're at the stage of the life where they are financially stable, they paid off their mortgages, they have pensions, they are very lucrative. So just by the sheer volume of scams sent to people of their demographic will mean that statistically one will pay off.
That makes total sense. And you can buy list of people, you can tailor it down based on demographics, a bunch of different demographics and things. And so they can buy lists of people that are specifically 60 and above, or they could do 80 and above, or 90 and above, thinking that maybe they'll be more vulnerable because things are going on beyond their control, right? With their mind or their whatever.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, and I think this is my hypothesis. I don't have any solid evidence, but for example, when you think about sextortion emails, just even a few years ago, they were being sent via email to grown-ups, grown-ups saying like, you've been caught, like visiting website you shouldn't, your family is going to be notified, your people at work are going to be notified. So now sextortion is aimed at teenagers. And then I was thinking to myself, like, and it's really harmful, but I was thinking to myself, if somebody targeted me as a teenager, I wouldn't have any money to give them. So like, why is it that teenagers are targeted? Probably because like teenagers nowadays get more money, they have more gadgets they can leverage, like they have more pocket money maybe that they
or
can
they have
spend.
access. They have access to some
or they
money.
have access to this thing. Exactly. Yeah. Because like if somebody hit me when I was 16, like I don't know what I would give them, my Walkman or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, true, right? I mean, it's and plus, they say that your brain is not fully developed until you're what? It was 25. Now they're saying 28 or something like that. So yeah, there's a lot of things, but we've only got a couple minutes left, and I want to get to this article that you wrote. It's the data breaches, a chance for opportunistic scammers and what you should watch for. It looks like it was September 3rd of 2021. It didn't
I wrote it. I think, like I ended up writing that article. It's still current now in terms of advice. I think it was a data breach by T-Mobile at that time. And that after that data breach, I've seen tons and tons of like people texting me, for pig butchering scams and stuff like that. So, but like all of the advice in that article, if you share with your, like wide audience, that advice still stands.
Okay.
So that's why I kind of republished it recently on my LinkedIn, because it's, it happens after every data breach.
Exactly. Yeah. And I do have it in the show notes. I have the actual link that somebody will be able to access. It was a really good article. Beware of social media campaigns and websites pretending to be fraud recovery services. I think I just saw, when I was downloading some public service announcements from the FBI, I think one of the ones they had in the last maybe 3 or 4 years dealt exactly with that. Fraudulent companies trying to entice you that they can get your money back. When they're obviously not going to be able to. The only people that can do that are going to be law enforcement and or the attorneys or the attorney general, district attorneys, whoever are doing the prosecution.
It's so difficult. It's also very, very difficult to recover funds.
Oh, it is. Absolutely. I mean,
like especially organized crime. Yeah.
Yeah. It's there was a couple here in Arizona that were arrested, I think maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and they went through all of their hearings and all that stuff. And it was for, I think, Medicare fraud and stuff like that. And they had a lot of assets, they were here in the States. And so they had used the money to like buy vehicles and houses. And so they had a lot of property that was then able to be seized and sold, but it was sold for pennies on the dollar. So if anybody was getting anything back, you were only getting pennies on the dollar back. But the majority of these scams, the money is out of the country and it's gone, right?
Yeah, I would say like a couple doing that's a small time crook, like organized crime, like pig butchering scams that originate in Vietnam, like the money's gone. And like, and the cross-border element makes it very difficult to recover anything.
Well, it does, because you're adding a whole nother layer into the investigation. You have to work with that local law enforcement. And sometimes they're very happy to work with our law enforcement. Other times they're not as excited. They have bigger fish to fry, per se, right?
Exactly.
And so they're not necessarily interested in allocating resources to help our law enforcement trying to find these perpetrators. So it just adds a whole nother layer of complexity to it and makes it all the more difficult. But we are getting to the end of the time. It went really quickly.
I know, it always does. It's always fun.
Yeah.
Talking.
So thank you so much for coming back on. I really appreciate it. And I want to have you back on a regular basis. You has your new book come out? I know you said you were working on updating it.
Yeah, I'm updating it. There's no date yet, but you might as well wait for the updated version, because I've added a lot of things on AI, how AI is going to affect us and stuff like that. So there are a lot more case studies that are of newer scams and things like that. So I would say, if you think purchasing the book, just wait a couple of months. There'll probably be a new edition.
And the book is The Psychology of Fraud, Persuasion, and Scam Techniques.
Yeah.
So is it going to be like have a number 2 after it, or volume 2 or something?
Yeah, it's going to be volume 2, and it's slightly different color. Like I have a trademark image that I love. It's still the same image, but it's going to be a different color. It's going to be purple instead of turquoise. So you can recognize it. It's going to be a second edition.
Okay.
And,
all right. Very good.
My book now is still okay, but like if you are thinking of purchasing, I would wait for the second edition.
There'd be a lot more information, and with AI, that's huge, and it's so confusing to tell what's real and what's artificially generated. And it'll be out really quickly.
Absolutely.
And you could probably write a book every day, right? Because this stuff changes so quickly.
True. Maybe not a book, but like a short novel.
A short novel every day or every week or whatever, but right? Because it changes so rapidly. Yeah. It does. It so really anyways, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on, and we're going to have you back soon. Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Take care. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope you got some more information on data breaches and what to do. Dr. Martina Dove is valuable source of information. The link to her article is going to be in the show notes. So click on that and read her article. But just know when data breaches happen and you get that information or you hear about it, just know that there's going to be an uptick in people trying to email you, the phishing or the texting, they call this smishing, or, the voice over the phone and all of that stuff. So you just have to be a little bit more on aware of that. You could have an uptick in that and be on the lookout. You should always have your guard up and be on the lookout for what's going on. Don't forget to get on our website, roseadvocacy.org. Look for the resources, follow us on social media, and sign up for our newsletter. Thank you. And you guys will be enjoying Brian Watson for the next few weeks. All right. Take care.
Well, that's all the knowledge for this episode. Tune in every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Time on K4HD Radio at k4hd.com as Joyce explores a variety of knowledge so you have the power to make scam protection your healthy habit. And until then, feel free to reach out to Joyce and let's talk about scams.